Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Up in Smokes Part 2. Today we're going to be talking about the unsolved mystery of Susan Powell. When we last left off, we had talked about after Joshua and Susan would get married, for a brief period of time, they would actually move in with Joshua's father, Stephen, in South Hill, Washington. And unfortunately for Susan, this would probably be one of the worst things that her and Joshua had did, because Stephen would become very creepily and obsessively infatuated with Susan. One thing about Stephen is he would constantly not only write journals, but he would also use a camcorder to actually make video journals, not only with himself, and take pictures with his camera. And this would have a lot to do with his infatuation and just a lot of his creepy habits around Susan. To say that he enjoyed taking photos of his 19-year-old daughter-in-law is a very, very mild understatement, as not only would he take pictures of Susan posing in a lot of these pictures, but he would also very creepily take photographs of not only her changing, but trying to use the bathroom and so on. And it's actually said that when the police actually investigated Stephen's house 2 years after this particular incident, they would find over 4,000 photographs in a lockbox underneath his bedroom. In fact, in one of these journal home footages that was taken by the police, he can be seen very creepily stalking, recording Susan while she's folding clothes. And while he's recording, he is just making very creepy statements like she's so perfect, and would even make the statement that whatever Susan did, he was always in a perpetual state of sexual arousal around Susan. In fact, when we had just talked about Stephen making little video journals, he would actually make a journal on one night and would begin talking about an incident where he had tried to rub Susan's foot. And he would go into detail about how much he wanted to take his hand above her calf and feel up her leg more than where he was, and it only rubbed from her feet to her calves. And he would even go into the statement and say that she can't be naive, and would very subtly hint at the fact that Susan must have known about his erection while rubbing her feet. Unfortunately, this would not be the only thing that Stephen would do when it came to Susan, as not only would he very creepily stalk and take photographs and record her at all times, but at the same time, he would also start collecting not only her underwear, but other personal items such as nail clippings, feminine products, and might I also add, a lot of these feminine products were used feminine products. And not only would he collect these things, again, 2 years after the incident, police would investigate Stephen's house, and they would look in a lockbox in his bedroom, and they would find the 4,000 photographs and all of the garments and personal effects that he had actually kept in a lockbox for himself. And not only would he make these little creepy home footage videos of Susan, he would start writing in these journals. Now, if you remember in our last video, we had talked about during Stephen's divorce with Joshua's mother, she had made the statement that Stephen had a habit of writing out sexual fantasies he had about with other married women that they knew, and had fantasies about making those married women one of his wives. Well, Stephen would start writing down sexual fantasies about Susan in his journals. Now, I also cannot stress this enough. Susan is 19 years old, where Stephen is
obviously in his 50s or 60s. And that statement alone will have a big part to play why Susan felt a certain way later on down the road. Stephen would also start creating these little love songs that he would write about Susan. And he would actually post a lot of these songs online. But whenever he would post these songs online to keep his infatuation a secret, he would always do it under a different name, which kind of makes it even more disgusting. And by 2003, Stephen would actually be driving Susan to her parents for a weekend. And during this trip, they would be talking back and forth. And I'm not sure if it was done on purpose, but the recorder would actually go off and record the conversation between Stephen and Susan. And I'm not sure if Stephen had recorded this conversation as a way to have proof, but he was just so delusional that Susan was just as infatuated with him as he was about her. And in this conversation, Susan would be talking about places that she wanted to visit and different vacations to take, which Stephen would be agreeing with. And then he would pause for a second and say, I don't know if I should say this, which should have been a dead giveaway of not to say anything. If you don't think you should say it, don't say it. It's at this point that Stephen starts going off a tangent and confessing his undying love for Susan, and would even use the moment that he had rubbed her feet on the couch as a moment of where he was aroused and was curious if she was aroused. And for good reason, this conversation would be extremely awkward for Susan, and you can definitely hear in the audio just how uncomfortable and just how awkward she feels at this point in time. And she would begin telling Stephen that she is married to his son and that she is his daughter-in-law, and would even place herself and say, I'm basically a step below your own children. And would even go as far to say, I just see you as my father-in-law. There's no sexual attraction. There's no attraction. I don't see you in any other way other than my father-in-law. And I really wish this is where it would end. But unfortunately, Stephen just didn't get the hint. In fact, after this conversation, Susan would actually go to Joshua and would actually tell Joshua everything that had been going on in Stephen's infatuations and the conversation that she had had with his father. It's actually after this conversation with Stephen and after Susan would confide and tell Joshua everything that Joshua and Susan would actually relocate to West Valley City, Utah. And one of the main reasons that obviously Susan wanted to relocate was to put as much distance between her and Stephen as possible, because she was just a 19-year-old girl just trying to live her married life with her husband. And Stephen was obviously making things extremely awkward and uncomfortable. She had also noticed the pull that Stephen had over Joshua in his life, and a lot of his manipulation and narcissistic tactics was just very heavy on Joshua, and she figured if she put enough distance between them that it could actually help their relationship in the long run. And you would think the distance would actually make Stephen stop a lot of his creepy habits around Susan, but this wouldn't stop anything, as he would constantly write Susan every single day, asking her on dates, asking her to go on vacations, and every single time would be the same answer: no, I'm not attracted to you, I'm married to your son. It would even get so bad that he would start sending nude photographs of himself to Susan. So obviously this was becoming more uncomfortable for Susan, and I really wish this is where it ends and it doesn't get any worse, but Unfortunately for Susan, this was not the worst of what was to happen.